Economy struggles. The president is ramping up his attacks on Governor Mitt Romney's tax plan.
It's like Robin Hood in reverse. It's Romney Hood.
Steve Moore calls that claim a fairy tale and is here to set the record straight. Steve, welcome to the program.
Hi, Stuart.
I listened very carefully to the president, and right before that soundbite, the Omni Hood soundbite, he actually said that Romney would raise taxes, raise middle-class taxes. They'd pay more in taxes. Now, where did the president get that from? Because I don't think that's part of Mr. Romney's plan.
Well, they made it up. This is based on a study that was done by the Tax Policy Center, which is a liberal think tank in Washington. Actually, one of the authors was a former Obama staffer. And that study says that middle-class people would pay a higher tax under the Romney plan than they do now. The problem with that analysis, Stuart, is that, in fact, Mitt Romney's plan cuts the tax rates by 20% for everybody, for every income class. They made all sorts of weird assumptions in the study. But here's the thing that's interesting, though, when we did the analysis in the editorial today. Did you know, Stuart, that today the top 20% of people in the top 20% of income, they pay now over 90% of the income tax. So it's this idea that the rich don't pay their fair share. It's craziness. In fact, the rich are paying almost all the federal income tax.
And if you go to the other end of the extreme, the other end of the income scale, I believe it's the reverse. The bottom 20% does not pay tax. In fact, it gets a tax rebate, so they get money coming in, which they've not paid out in the first place. Is that accurate?
You've got it. Well, actually, it's more like the bottom third, 1/3, 33%. And you're right, Stuart, they get what are called refundable tax credits. And that's a fancy term for basically a welfare payment, a check from the government. And so the trick in this study that President Obama was citing is that they say that any time you take away any of that money that's given to these low-income households, that's a tax increase. So a reduction in a benefit is actually a tax increase. Stuart, that would be like saying if we cut food stamps, reducing food stamps is a tax increase. It just doesn't make any sense.
Okay, one other thing that I picked out. The president says that if you give a tax cut to the rich, you are giving money to the rich.
Now,
exactly. How do you explain that?
Since when? Yeah, well, this is the idea that allowing people to keep more of their own money is some kind of a government benefit to them. And it's almost like saying the government has first claim on your assets, and if they're nice enough, they'll let you keep whatever you take. One of the things we found, I thought that was really interesting, Stuart, was we looked at the last 3 or 4 times in history. In the 60s, under Kennedy, in the 80s, under Reagan, and then, as you know, we did the Tax Reform Act of 1986. Those all cut tax rates. And what we found was exactly what the opposite of what the president is saying. In every one of those instances when we cut tax rates, guess what happened to the share of taxes paid by the rich, Stuart?
It went up, I presume.
They went up substantially. In fact, used to be the rich paid about 20%. The richest 1% paid about 20% of the income tax burden. Today, even with rates much lower than they were in the 70s and 60s, they now pay 40%. The top 1% pay 40%. That's an amazing statistic.
It just doesn't sound right, does it? Superficial. It doesn't sound right. If you lower the tax rate on rich people, they end up paying a greater share of total taxation.
And they
lower the tax rate and the Treasury gets more money. Just doesn't sound right, does it?
It doesn't, but the history proves it, and the answer is that when you cut the tax rates, this is the case that Mitt Romney is making, and I happen to agree with it. When you cut tax rates, you liberate the economy, you get more economic growth, you get more people working, you get those retail stores like Macy's that you were just talking about that do better, and guess what? Everybody pays more taxes, but the rich pay even a bigger share than they do now. So, by the way, the president's plan is to do just the opposite. He would raise those rates up, and I actually think if they do that, they will lose revenues, especially from capital gains.
All right, Steve Moore, always a pleasure. Thanks very much, sir.
Stuart, great to be with you.
All right.